This presentation is about living without electricity. This topic will be broken into three portions. Part 1 is the causes of no power and bathrooms and water pumps. Part 2 is kitchen and laundry. And Part 3 is heating and lighting. So what can make you lose power anyway? There can be temporary power losses, which we all are used to. That could be caused by a car accident of someone running into a power pole and dismantling the power supply. It can be done by damage from tree limbs falling on power lines. It can be done by windstorms. It can be done by excessive heat, requiring the power company to turn the power off to prevent overload. It can be done by ice. An example of that is we were in Arizona when some friends of ours in Washington State called us and told us about an ice storm. I'd not experienced an ice storm, but that's a situation where the rain freezes when it hits an object. And so on a tree, it builds up a coating of ice on everything on the tree, including limbs and the trunk. And then when you combine that with wind, because the outer shell is frozen, it just snapped trees right off. So ice can impact power as well because of an ice storm. Another one is snow. You can have a lot of weight from the snow limbs falling down on power transmission lines. And the last on our list is lightning, which is a very common way of starting a fire, or in the case of power, it could be hitting a transformer and taking out the ability for that section to have power. So for this and maybe some other reasons, we've all experienced, I'm sure, temporary loss of power. In our area, the power company has a website and an app, and you can go to the when there's an outage, and it will notify you on the map of where the outages are, how many people have reported being affected, and information like that. Nearly 20% of weather-related outages are caused by cold weather and ice storms, and another 18% are caused by hurricane and tropical storms. In 1999, approximately 97 million of the 160 million people living in Brazil lost power in what was the biggest blackout ever at that time. A bolt of lightning struck an electricity substation, which in turn shut down the largest power plant in the world. Later in 2003, southeastern Canada and 8 northeastern U.S. states were without power. 50 million people were inconvenienced for up to 2 days in what turned out to be the biggest blackout in North American history to that time. The cause was tree limbs rubbing on power lines, which then created a chain reaction and expanded to parts of 2 countries. In 2017, Hurricane Maria caused 1.5 million customers to lose electricity across Puerto Rico, causing the largest blackout in U.S. history at that time and the second largest blackout in the world. It took almost a year, 328 days, to restore all the power. Power can also be interrupted by malicious activity, by attacks. A sniper attack is an example of someone with a gun shooting at equipment. A cyber attack would be done through the internet, somebody taking control of the computerized control systems. That could be done either maliciously to just without warning shut it down, or done for ransom. And then we talked in a previous session about EMPs. how an EMP can take out the entire country's grid and take it out semi-permanently, actually. So if you're not familiar with EMP, I recommend you go back to a previous session and watch that episode. Power outage attacks. So take a look at that. So in 2013, a sophisticated domestic terror assault was carried out on the Pacific Gas and Electric Company's Metcalf transmission substation in Coyote, California, near the border of San Jose, resulting in more than $15 million worth of equipment damage. I remember this incident, and it was well coordinated, and they were never caught. And so the suspicion is that these people were terrorists who were trying out to see if they could get away with it. And now that they knew that they could coordinate simultaneous similar attacks across the country and never have to blow up a bomb, never have to even trespass the property, just simply by target practicing. 2019, a power grid attack happened in the western United States. The power grid cyber attack continued for nearly 10 hours. So that's somebody taking down the grid because it can't control itself because the computer has been compromised. In 2019, President Trump issued an executive order in an effort to assess the risks of such an attack, particularly an EMP, on the U.S. infrastructure. Preliminary studies indicate that a catastrophic EMP event could cripple the United States economy and its military. In 2019, this is just another picture of the same EMP signing the executive order to deal with the power grid. So what do you do with a situation, temporary or long-term, where you don't have electricity, and therefore if you are in the country, your well water is likely a well, and it is pumped through an electric pump. So if you don't have electricity, you don't have water almost immediately. If you have some alternative energy, like solar and batteries, then you may have the capabilities of keeping that pump running. But for this scenario, we're going to assume that you're in a situation where you have no electricity. And how do we deal with toilets? Well, there it is, the old-fashioned outhouse. And so that's about all you can do. What about a shower? In our previous session on country living tips on how to save money, we showed an example of a cabin that had no electricity and no running water, but it had one of these showers, and this is a 5-gallon bucket on a rope with a pulley and a shower head on the bottom of the bucket. So you lower the bucket down, you fill it up with water, and you raise it up, and then you can have a shower. I have friends who, when they first moved into their country, they were young, they had one of these showers outside of their cabin, and any time of the year they would have a shower out there, out in this little open sky situation. And what about hand washing when there's no running water? Well, you're either going to do it in a creek, or you could have a barrel that is above and adds some pressure, like this lady here. Now, one suggestion is if you live in the country and you have a well pump that's electric, you may want to consider buying a manual pump to add on top of it. You can see from this picture that this is an electrically powered well pump with the water pipe coming out the top and going back into the ground to go to the house. But this device is put on the top of the well casing cap. This particular brand is called a simple pump, but there are other brands as well. This is stainless steel. It sits out in the weather. And if for some reason you can't pump water with electricity out of your well, then this pump can be done by hand. much like the old farmhouses 100 years ago all did. By the way, if you live in the city and you don't have a well and the power goes out, the the water will continue to run for a while because the water has already been pumped into a water tower that you see in every town, and gravity provides the pressure. Without the electricity, though, eventually that tank's going to run dry and you won't have water. Now, part 2 is about operating a kitchen and laundry with no electricity.
Hello, I'm going to be going over working in the kitchen and doing laundry without power. So, water. Without power, you will be needing to carry your water from your water source to your kitchen. Buckets will be the easiest way to transport your water, and you will need more than one bucket. Buckets are designed to carry water with minimal sloshing. I recommend that you have a small and a large tea kettle to heat the water on your wood stove. Using the kettle will help save you from getting burned when pouring hot water. You can use a pan, but they don't have the pour spout that directs the hot water where you want it. Once the water in your kettle is hot, you now have options. It can be used in cooking, such as making tea, rehydrating foods, such as veggies or fruits, or cleaning. It can be used to wash your dishes, and for this I recommend having dish pans or large metal bowls. You can use your sink if it's small and you have a gravity flow drain field. If you need power to move your water into your drain field, don't use your sink. Pour your hot water over your dishes that are in your dish pan, letting the hot water loosen the dried-on food. And at this point, you can add cooler water so that when you add your soap, it doesn't burn your hands and you can actually wash your dishes. Then have another dish pan for the rinse water. Rinse your dishes and then put them in the dish drain. If it's summertime, pour your cooled dishwater onto your plants to water them. When cooking, try to keep to the portions that you have predetermined for your family. You should have a running tally of the food in your pantry. A tally will help you keep track of what you have used and what you have added. Such as in the summer, when you can forage and eat out of your garden, you will use less food from your pantry. And you should also at this time be adding food back into your food storage. When you portion your food correctly, you should not have any leftovers. Without electricity, you will not have a refrigerator to keep food from spoiling. 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder is the general rule for cold storing food. If it's winter and it's 40 degrees or less, you can keep your food outside. Just make sure that animals can't get to it. If you have a cellar, it may be cool enough to keep food fresh in the summertime, but double check the temperature to be sure. You may be able to make a cool cupboard in your kitchen. It can be a small cupboard that you have cut the back out all the way through the outside of your house. And it has to be on a north-facing wall. Cover with strong screen to keep the bugs and animals out. This would work well in our area in Western Washington in the winter. It would be like having a cool temperature pantry. There is also a cool cupboard that is designed to draw air in and bring it through underground pipe that cools it, and then it flows into your designed cupboard in your house. If you Google cool cupboards, some different designs should come up. So moving on to cleaning. Make sure that you have a bucket and a mop to clean your floors. You'd be surprised how many people don't own a mop. You will not have a vacuum, so a broom or two would be good to sweep your carpets and your floors. And don't forget a dustpan. Now, cooking. Cooking on a wood-burning stove is the same as cooking on an electric or gas stove. Pan, food, and heat. You need to keep your fire hot to maintain the heat. I started using cast iron about 2 years ago and find that you need a lot of oil to maintain them, to keep them seasoned. In the no buy or sell time, that could be a problem. And so I have now purchased non-stick skillets that use less oil. So when cooking on a regular wood stove, this is a wood-burning stove, you should have an established fire. You can use cast iron or other cookware. That's totally your choice. Plan your time out. It takes longer to cook on a wood stove than on electric, than on a gas or an electric stove. Watch your food. This will eliminate burnt food. If your stove is too hot, move your pot to a different location on your stove. Just like on a grill, your stove has different heating zones, depending where your fire is. Foods easy to cook are soups, stews, fried foods such as potatoes and veggies. Pancakes are another good one to cook on top of the wood stove. You can get wood stoves with a cooktop, and that is, it has a higher shelf on the back part of the wood stove. You can also cook in the firebox of your stove, and the firebox is the main part of your stove where you build your fire. You let the fire burn down and to coals, and then using appropriate equipment such as a grilling basket or propped up grate, bake some potatoes or whatever you can think of in your firebox. This is very important. Have a way to put out a fire if you should have an accident. A bucket of water or a fire extinguisher in a can. And I Googled fire extinguishers in the can, and there are quite a few different types of fire extinguishers in a can, and their expiration date is about 3 years. I have one in my house that does not have an expiration date, so I will be replacing it. But I also feel that you should have one in all the rooms, just because if you are without electricity, you will be using candles possibly or oil lamps. So it's good to have a way to put out a fire. And I have had wood heat for 35 years in my houses and have never had a fire. I grew up with wood heat, and not once did we have even a scare of one. You just have to pay attention, be careful, and do proper maintenance on your stove, cleaning your chimney, etc. If you have a wood cook stove, now this is not your wood heating stove, but an actual cook stove, you need to work with it. But you will find it easier to cook on with more options than a regular wood stove. And from all I've read, it will take time and practice to get the hang of establishing your fire, using the draft regulators, and finding the right wood that you like. And this will be gone over in a later class, but different wood burns with different temperatures. Now moving on to laundry. Doing laundry by hand is not going to be fun. But that being said, we can make it better if we have a few tools to help. Some things that you will need: wash tubs, one for washing, one for rinsing, scrub boards, for larger items like jeans, and smaller one for smaller items such as socks. And if you can, buy a wringer for wringing out your clothes. Clothes have to be wrung out, and your wrists are going to get very tired. But it can be done. and a clothes plunger. And a clothes plunger looks like a toilet plunger, but it's specifically made to plunge clothing in a wash tub. And it would be the same type of motion also. So one method I came across was to pre-soak your clothing if it's very dirty, such if you were working in the garden and it was heavily soiled, you would want to pre-soak it. You want to make sure that you sort your clothing by colors, colored clothes, and then your white clothes. You don't want to soak them all together because you don't want anything to possibly fade into your white clothing. And you would either heat up your water or wash in cold at this point. It's totally up to you, whichever way you want to, whatever temperature you want to wash in. And don't use powdered soap as it doesn't dissolve in the water very well. So you would use your scrub board or plunger, wash your clothing, and after you washed an item, you wring it out either by hand or with the wringer to remove excess soap and the soapy water from the wash tub. And then you would throw that item, once you wrung the soap out as much as you could, into the rinse water. And that's where you rinse the rest of the soap out of the item. And once you've rinsed the soap out of the item, you take it out and you wring it out, either again with the wringer or by hand, and then hang it onto your clothesline or your collapsible drying racks. Now I have 2 drying racks or accordion racks that I use next to my wood stove in the wintertime. And in the summertime I can take them outside also. And so those are a good handy thing to have for drying clothes in the house. You can also, if you're not drying clothing, you can dry other things on them, such as corn or herbs. Hang herbs up by bunches and dry them in a dark area. So drying racks that are movable are very handy. And also, of course, you want to have a clothesline. So a couple tips on saving laundry washing. So wearing outer clothing more than once will help cut back on your laundry. And hang your towels to dry between uses so that you can use them as many times as you feel comfortable. You should be clean when you're drying your hands after you've washed them, and after your face after you've taken a bath or shower or whatever. So they are not dirty. You can dry them in between, and this will save you having to wash extra clothing and towels. You can also have your family wash their own underclothes and socks throughout the week. And this will not hurt the children. They can learn to do laundry. And as a side thought, it would be nice to have an extra package of new men's and women's socks and underwear, just in case someone shows up at your door and they had to leave in a hurry and they don't have anything to wear. It would be nice that if you had a few items to share with them, so that they too could have extra clothing. And if you should run out of laundry soap, on the next class that I do in the pantry, I'm going to go over what you need to make laundry soap with. To sum up the differences from now to the future, without power, we will be wood stove cooking, no running water, no refrigerator, and laundry by hand. So take a look at your home and evaluate how you need to overcome these challenges.
Now part 3 is about how to heat and light your home with no electricity.
Lights and heating with no electricity. Light. the Bible speaks about light. We think about when light was created in Genesis 1:3, God spoke and there was light. But there is also in Psalms 119:105, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. John 8:12. So light has lots of spiritual connotations as well as physical connotations. God created light in its physical form, in its particle form, in its wave form, but he also created it in the spiritual form as well. And we need to seek after the light. But when there is no electricity and we don't have our traditional forms of light, we need to look to other forms of light when we are needing that in a time of no power. So one of the things to keep in mind when you are using flame-based light is ventilation. Make sure that you have adequate ventilation because they do give off fumes from whatever fuel you're going to be using. Be sure it's as clean as possible of fuel. That way the residues are not toxic to you. And also be aware of fire hazards, the potential for tipping and fuel that could be ignited and things of that nature. Also, some things to keep in consideration is how to start the fire in your lamp or light source and or heat source. So you want to have matches. There's the good old strike anywhere wood box matches or other types of wood matches. You can also use book matches. The cardboard tends to get potential dampness a little quicker, but definitely available and usable. You could use a refillable or a non-refillable butane lighter, whether it's the small thumb variety, pocket variety, or the larger wand type. And you could also use a magnesium fire starter to spark and do it with flint and steel. And there's other methods as well that you may want to practice. For example, a bow drill fire, a magnifying glass fire, and or other types of fire starting opportunities and ways to do that. But those are things you'd want to practice outside of an emergency, so you wouldn't have to be learning that skill in an emergency period of time. So some sources of non-electric light. One would be the incandescent kerosene lamp. This is my favorite. Had been partial to Aladdin brand incandescent kerosene lamps. I don't personally have one, but I've always wanted one. They give a very bright light and are kind of the gold standard for bright indoor light from long ago, and they still are in use and available new today. If you find a used one, make sure that you get one with an intact mantle area because they do have a tendency to corrode because I believe they used to use salt on occasion for some condition of the lamp, and I don't remember exactly what that is, but just remember being made aware of the fact that sometimes there's corrosion involved. It's not just from the regular burning of it. So a good option for bright indoor light. Would run about $200 or more. Another form of incandescent lamp is the dual fuel Coleman lantern. Nice to have a dual fuel option. So it would be white gas or auto gas, about $90, and you can burn it up to 14 hours on a low burn. So that could be several days if you're just using it for a short period of time in the evening, or it could run for 14 hours, which would take you through the night. It does require mantles, so that's something you'd want to have on hand. It's nice that it has a dual fuel option. So those are some good features. You could also go with a Coleman butane canister version, although those are throwaway canisters, which I don't particularly appreciate. They're handy, but you have to purchase them, and you can get them really quite inexpensively. They just attach to the top of a butane fuel canister. And there's a good old-fashioned wick-based lantern, kerosene wick lantern. It does need wicks periodically, so I'd want to have a stock of those around. and kerosene, but these have burned well through the years. Barn lantern, wick lantern, they're just very, very solid, well-burning lamps. I've seen even some that have an attachment for heating some water at the top there at the vent, because the heat would exit through that point. And these are relatively inexpensive. Other indoor sources of light, you could go with gas lights. So if you have a propane source, you could install some gas lighting. That would take a little bit of installation and some fixtures. Some of them could even be portable, as you can see in the lower right. They are bright light, which is good. And again, those will probably be used just periodically. We visited some friend's cabin up on the Cascade River, and that's how they heated their cabin, because they were it was a non-power cabin. It was all propane. Everything was propane. The fridge and the light fixtures, etc., were all propane. They didn't have other power features. Oil lamps. So again, kerosene can be used there. Lamp oil, olive oil, and even animal fat. It does require wicks, but you do kind of go down the gradient. Lamp oil will probably be less soot produced from it than kerosene, but you're kind of moving down the scale, but you can burn lots of different things in a wick-based oil lamp. You can use one that has a reflector, and that would increase its ability to throw light around the room. So again, a wick-based oil lamp that has a reflector associated with it. This is a wall-mounted one. There are also hand-carried wick-based reflector lamps available. Then you can move to the candle. You can make candles. You can make candles from beeswax. If you want to use beeswax or soy-based wax, they are better than paraffin due to the soot components that are created from that. A 10-inch candle here can burn up to 12 hours from Lehman's, $36 for 12 when they're on sale. And so they have a good longevity in burning. Again, could last you several days if you just use them for a short period of time. You can also use tea lights in a variety of ways. So this tin candle reflector option is created by creating a window. Just set your tea light inside, and it functions as a reflector, in addition to being a safe place to house your candle. They're in their little cups, so they're pretty safe anyway, but this just helps them be in a more restricted environment. There's also another, this is the other variety, has the vents cut and then squished down a bit to provide light escaping. Probably have to spread a vent to drop your candle inside, and then put it back into place. A little rougher looking than the other one, but another way to contain a light source. So the tea lights are pretty handy. You can get them in bunches very inexpensively. You can even use an LED form of a tea light to provide light, which have good longevity as well, although they are battery based, but they are reusable in that sense. You can even use them in some sense for heat. Here's a picture in the lower left of a tea light inside of a snow cave. So it makes quite a bit of bright light because of the reflective factor of the snow in this scenario. Then moving to kind of other sources of light, you could use a pine sap lamp. This would probably be something you'd want to use outdoors, because it has, while it burns light, you have to kind of keep it fed, and the soot may be significant from that. And anything else that could burn could also be used for a light source, in addition to the fact that it could be used for heat. So here's a tea light pancake maker out of a number 10 can. So pop some tea lights inside. Looks like they're effectively having enough heat there to do a pancake. So not only a light source, not so much a light source here, but also actually a small little stove or a griddle. You can use a number 10 can for a heater or a coffee can, if that's what's available. With a lid on it, you can store your matches and your tea lights right inside that, and that can be used as a heat source. Not a wide area heat source, but a small area heat source for sure. So you can also use a 4-ounce little can. This individual was experimenting with different ways to cook with not much, and they took just a mason jar lid with the lid poked a hole in it, put a washcloth in it into some oil. You can use any kind of like vegetable oil to do that. Just soak the rag, and you can see the flame that produced from it, so they could use that for light. They put it on some cinder blocks in a tile floor onto a cookie sheet, and that cookie sheet heated up really hot and made a good radiator, they said, but it didn't do a very good job of boiling the water. It probably would get something warm, but it functioned really well in a cold environment to make that cookie sheet hot and radiate heat into the room. Probably a bit on the sooty side. Moving to heat that is contained, if you have a wood stove that has no electrical features to it, in order to make it work well, you have a wonderful thing. Tight stoves can hold a fire overnight, so you can actually have a one-match fire season for cold evenings, winter time. If you stop it down, you can hold a fire overnight. Typically, you can burn almost anything in them. The catalytic types will do that less so. You don't want to burn, plastics or things with paint and things like that. Anyway, but if that's all you had to burn, a catalytic version, it would probably not go so well with it from a catalytic standpoint. But the catalytic types are very good at gasifying and using the fuel completely and burning cleanly. You could make a barrel stove. They have kits for adding a door, and you could put a stovepipe on a barrel stove. They even have some of these that are adapted for heating. You can see a little bit of a heating coil on the back side there for preheating hot water. This can be used in a shop. It can be used in people use them in a house, in the basement to heat the house. But you'd want to have that prefabbed or made ahead of time prior to the need, although it could be done on the spur of the moment too, if you have the right equipment. So when you're doing heating in your house, you want to select where you're going to heat. You want to make an area that's as small as possible to heat, so you're not using excessive resources. In an emergency situation, especially if you don't have a system set up to heat your house, like say for wood already, you can use one room, make it smaller with blankets, keep doors closed. However, you do want to make sure that you're keeping your plumbing adequately warm. Here's a waterfall disaster that took place with a catastrophic leak in a ceiling. This house looks like it was pretty empty except for fixtures, because there's no other artifacts of life here, but it created quite a cascade of water here and ice, and quite a disaster. So you want to make sure you keep your plumbing adequately warm. Adequate ventilation, using a carbon monoxide detector would be a good idea, especially if you're using a lot of indoor flame sources. Our stove and many stoves can suck air from the outside into the chamber and then out, and that's actually a good idea because it uses outdoor air, keeps your indoor air more clean, and also maintains the cold air for combustion as opposed to using the warm air of the house, and keeps it cleaner inside. You can also use a kerosene heater. Kerosene heaters are handy and work well. They just require kerosene. And so if you have a stock of that around, that can be helpful. If you don't, it's not going to work so well. But kerosene heaters are good non-power sourced heat plants. Propane heaters. Propane, it has the benefit of having infinite storage time. If you have it in a tank, it'll last essentially forever. So liquid petroleum, you can get one of these Mr. Heater Buddies to attach on the surface, on the top, or wall-mounted units, which would take some plumbing, but they work really well for heating and have that infinite storage time on their fuel source.